Hey wildlife photographers. So ever since I've mentioned online that I have had the Nikon Z6II, I've been getting a lot of questions. What do you think of the camera? Is it worth getting this camera? I'm interested in this camera or this camera. What should I get as far as Nikon shooters go? And so I gotta tell you, at this point, I've spent over 3 weeks with the Nikon Z6II photographing a wide variety of wildlife, and I love it. I'm really happy with this camera. I am surprised about that. I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I do. I'm really just enjoying the overall shooting process with it, and I gotta say, at this point, I think it's a recommendation. Everything's not perfect with it. No camera ever seems to be. But compared to the Nikon D4S that I was shooting before this camera, it's keeping up with pretty much everything I'm throwing at it, and I'm really surprised about that. So there's a few little things where it really does seem to not keep up. The main thing being really fast action. And I'll get into that a little bit more later on in my thoughts about this camera. So the other area that I haven't fully put it through its paces is shooting heavy backlight with the sun shining directly into the lens, dealing with lens flare, sometimes actually having the sun in the frame, that sort of stuff, which is a style of light I love to shoot. I haven't done a ton of that with this camera, but yesterday I was able to shoot a little bit of backlight with it, and it did just fine. So none of this is scientific. None of this is comparing, very specific things side by side or any of that kind of stuff. This is just my thoughts on this camera after shooting it for 3 weeks and looking at all the photos I've put through it. The first 2.5 weeks I spent with this camera was mainly hide photography. I was photographing belted kingfishers, hooded mergansers, bufflehead, and I just had a lot of clients lined up to photograph those, so that's what I was doing. That photography isn't a lot of a challenge. You're sitting motionless, you're just waiting for the birds to either swim by or land on the perch right in front of you. So I got a little bit more comfortable with the camera, but not a real thorough test. Just yesterday though, however, I finally took this camera out to one of the most challenging places along the New Jersey coast here that I shoot, and that is a place called Barnegat Light Jetty. So it's a jetty right in an ocean with a swift current inlet, and it's always a challenge there. It kicks my butt, it kicks the gear's butt. And so yesterday I had salt water splashing all over this thing. I had the flip LCD out like this. Waves were crashing up underneath of it, so it was wet everywhere. The camera just kept going. No slowdowns, it never hesitated, it just kept doing great. I cleaned it up really good when I got home. Everything seems to be perfectly fine, so bonus for the weather sealing on this Z6II. And some other things that this camera let me do that I could not have done with my previous D4S is I was laying on some rocks and I was actually trying to get as low water level as I could, but there were some rolling waves coming in, not huge waves, but waves. And so I was able to hang the camera out like this over the side, hang it down lower, and use the flip out LCD to track focus. Now, I ended up putting 1,800 frames on this camera yesterday in 4 hours, all on a single battery, which is impressive. So I did not think the battery was going to last that long, especially since I would say probably 80% of what I was shooting was using this back LCD because of how I just described how I was shooting. And so I normally don't shoot that much, but hanging a camera over like that, not being able to look through the viewfinder, the birds moving on waves, me playing chicken with the waves, constantly lifting my camera up and down as the waves were coming in. I had to put a lot of frames on because I wasn't sure if anything was even going to be sharp. That being said, I've looked through those photos and the majority of them are sharp. I got some really great shots, which I will show you. And so yeah, I finally feel like I put this camera through its paces after about 3 weeks of having it. And I was impressed. Birds in flight I'm getting. I was using this exact setup yesterday, the Nikon 300 f4PF, the 1.4 teleconverter, the FTZ adapter, and it was doing great. A little bit slow to achieve focus on really distant or close things, so if it had to rack focus a lot, it was a little bit slow, but that's always kind of a little bit slower with this setup compared to the 500 f4, which kind of snaps in a little bit quicker. So that was kind of to be expected. But once it locked in, it really held up with it. So Yeah, overall, weather sealing great. Performance just seems so much more improved over the Z6 that I spent a week with. Granted, I've spent longer with this, and I may have gotten more comfortable with that camera over time, the original Z6 I'm talking about, but I definitely think the additional processor in this and just the overall improved performance that Nikon said they have done with this Z6II has really come true. And I'm very happy about that because I was certainly a little concerned when I first bought this camera. The sharpness is amazing on these. The file quality is incredible. I'm impressed. Even with the resolution increase on this camera compared to my D4S, going from 16 megapixel to 24 megapixel with this camera, which is nice having that little bit of resolution increase. The low light capability on this still is better than my D4S, which is mind-blowing, that camera was already great. So super impressed with that. Color seems great. The files seem a little bit less saturated overall to begin with compared to my D4S, but that's a very easy thing to fix. So no big deal there. And overall, I have to say, if I just shoot this camera just like I did with my D4S, meaning using single point autofocus or dynamic autofocus, the dynamic group, to track things that are a little bit more active or birds in flight, if I use it just like that, which is basically exactly how I use my D4S, the camera is just performing right on par, it seems. I think with the most extreme action, so real fast action, birds in flight, if you're just shooting a ton of action, then maybe it's not the camera for you because, you know, the frame rate is definitely less. So on the regular high-speed frame rate, it's, I think, 5 frames a second, something like that, if I'm not mistaken. Let me verify that real quick. Yes, 5 frames a second. You can put it into a continuous high-speed extended mode, and I think it goes up to 12 frames a second, but when you do that, you have 2 options. One is to see pretty much nothing in the viewfinder while you're shooting, a black frame, which is no good. Or the other option is it will show you the shot that it just took. And so when's the one time you're going to want to actually use the 12 frames a second other than really high speed action, right? That's when you want to put all those frames on your subject. Well, if that's the case, trying to track anything that's moving quick with this basically stuttering slideshow of photos is near impossible. You almost instantly lose your subject in the frame, and so it seems kind of pointless to me. So I have not even been shooting in that super high speed mode because also everything other than those fast action things, I personally don't ever find I need that. Even with my D4S, I generally would shoot that around 7 frames a second. So this is a little bit slower at 5 frames a second, but not a huge deal there. If you are a photographer that feels like you need the absolute highest frame rate, then again, even though this camera does have it, if you're shooting action with that, it's probably not going to be the best camera for you. So things I love, silent shutter mode. I haven't taken it off of that. Absolutely love it. It's just so nice having a completely silent camera out there. Even with subjects where it's not necessary, I just absolutely love not hearing the shutter going off in my own ear out there. It just kind of immerses me in the wildlife and connects me a little bit more with the subject, I feel. So that's been really nice. The flip out LCD has been really nice. Like I said, I've been doing a lot of hide photography, which a lot of it has been with ducks, which is laying prone. So basically having a built-in right angle viewfinder, which is essentially what this is nice. So that way I haven't had to attach a separate right angle viewfinder, which I used to do on the D4S. So that has been really nice. The video features, absolutely amazing. The ability for me to record the viewfinder for some of these projects and to show you guys a little bit what it's like to shoot with this camera, absolutely amazing. And let's see what else has been really nice. Those are kind of the standout features so far, I would say. Oh, the what you see is what you get exposure kind of thing. So seeing your actual exposure in the viewfinder or with the LCD there, it's nice. I'm not addicted to it yet. I could see the more I shoot with it though, the more I would get used to it. I'm still kind of relying on the meter a little bit more just because I trust that more. But given more time with this camera, I could see me learning to trust that viewfinder and the proper exposure there and kind of seeing exactly what I'm going to get would be a nice thing. So certainly not a negative at all, and probably only something that's going to grow on me and become more positive over time. Okay, some things I don't like. Every once in a while when you miss with autofocus and say you're trying to hit the subject and it hits the background, it seems like it takes this camera a little bit longer to kind of ignore that background and come back to the subject. I've even had a couple of times where it was just like over and over again, I just kept trying to get it back on the subject and it was just locked on that background to the point of where I had to manually just grab the focus ring, rack it back closer to the subject, then it would pick up and catch the subject. And this was using just single point continuous autofocus. So that's a little bit annoying. The viewfinder blackout. So even when you're shooting, I've seen some videos from some friends that have other companies' mirrorless cameras, and you barely notice it, but as you can see or will see in some of the videos I'm going to show you as you're shooting through the viewfinder, just taking a still shot, it blacks out a decent amount of time. I think it feels even longer on this than it does with the D4S with the actual mirror flipping up and down. So that's annoying, and as I mentioned already, just the viewfinder blackout from when you first, bring the camera up to your eye and you kind of have to wake it up and that sort of thing. So I've definitely missed shots already on that, but it's something that I think with practice and new habits that I can improve upon. I've already touched on the animal detection, IAF, and subject tracking. And again, you'll see if you watch further past my conclusion here, you'll see in some of the videos that I show through the viewfinder how that works or doesn't work at times. As I'll mention, it's not 100% failure. It's not like it fails all the time. Sometimes it does work, but it's the inconsistency that's the part that prevents me from having any of those modes be like a go-to method for me. And I just kind of end up sticking with the tried and true single point or dynamic for my own personal shooting so far. I'll keep playing with it. Maybe it'll get better. The battery life has been really surprisingly great. I can't believe how long it's lasted, especially with using the flip out LCD a little bit more and doing video a lot more, that sort of stuff. That being said, it's still something I have to pay attention to now, which is something I never had to do before. The D4S battery just went for literally, no exaggeration, days and days on a single battery. So I now have to make sure if I'm not just doing a 1 or 2 hour outing that I have to bring another battery with me or two. Especially if I'm going to be out all day, I'm probably going to need, a total of 3 batteries, something like that would be my guess. So that's a little bit different, but I'm happy to see that it is lasting quite a while and longer than I anticipated, so that's a nice thing. And the last thing on the somewhat negative side that I want to mention and kind of dive into a little bit is some of these things I think can be upgraded and either entirely fixed or improved upon with firmware upgrades. I know in the original Z6, which I didn't own, but I certainly followed along with that, in that version, they definitely improved a lot of things over the year or so that camera was out. And so there is potential for that to happen, but I would suggest to anyone to not buy a camera based on what it may do with some improvements down the road. Because they may never materialize, or they may not materialize in the way we expect or the way we hope, and that sort of thing. If they do, that's great. That's a nice bonus. And so if this camera gets some really nice improvements via firmware updates down the road, I'm going to be thrilled about that. But I certainly didn't buy it, and currently right now am not expecting any of those things to happen. So I just wanted to put that out there and give you that to think about when deciding if you're going to purchase and upgrade to a camera like this. So my overall conclusion is, if you are a Nikon shooter, a wildlife or bird photographer, and thinking about going mirrorless and haven't yet, I would say I fully recommend it at this point. At this point, I would say any Nikon shooter asking me if it's worth upgrading to a mirrorless camera or just thinking about upgrading their regular DSLR, I honestly would say you should probably go mirrorless. I don't think I can recommend anyone purchasing a DSLR at this point. These cameras are, at least for me, this is my perspective, these cameras are an investment I use for a long time. I was shooting my previous D4S for 6 years. So it's not a camera I'm going to buy and then upgrade every year, every couple of years. I'm going to buy these cameras and use them for a long time. And so I don't see much of a future for the DSLR line with what these cameras are doing now and obviously where they're going to go. There's still a few things that are a little bit behind with this camera, not many, and they're not that big a deal for most of my shooting. And so already I think this is going to become my main camera. In fact, I know it's going to become my main camera. And so thinking about the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, I don't know why I would be shooting a DSLR at all at that point. If this camera just keeps improving through firmware updates, or the next versions that come out have better improvements on a couple of these nitpicky issues I've mentioned, it's all just going to be better than what the DSLR is doing. So that's my recommendation. Also, I would say keep this in mind. Don't just take my word or any other photographer's word on what camera you should buy and upgrade to. Every photographer is unique. Every photographer has a unique set of goals and a unique approach to wildlife photography. They have their own style of shooting and editing and what they want in the end. Your style may be totally different than mine. Your goals may be totally different than mine, and they may be totally different than any other photographers. So in the end, I highly, highly recommend renting the camera you're thinking about purchasing before you buy it. Certainly, these types of reviews and other photographers' reviews are great to get an idea of what they think about the camera, but in the end, it should be about what you think about the camera and what feels right to you. Because just because these things are working great for me now, do not mean they're going to translate into working great for you and how you like to shoot and what you like to shoot. So, like I said, for me, a camera is something I'm going to use for probably anywhere between 4 to 6 years. So what's a couple $100 extra in the beginning to rent it and make sure that's the right fit for you? So that's my thought on it. Overall, I would say if you've been hesitating on going mirrorless, this Z6II is the way to go. I know the Z7II is coming out soon. A lot of people have asked me, why the Z6II versus the Z7II? Why not go with the 7? For me, I find myself shooting in low light way more than I ever feel the need to crop in. Me cropping in a ton with these high resolution sensors, it's just not for me. I've been shooting a 16 megapixel camera for 6 years. Prior to that, I was shooting a 12 megapixel camera. I have all of these prints hanging on the wall. I have larger prints over there. I have an even larger one hanging over there, all from 12 megapixel, 16 megapixel images that were somewhat cropped. They all look great hanging on the wall. I personally don't see the need or desire for these crazy high resolution cameras, but again, that's for me. I love the low light capability that these lower resolution sensors give and the overall faster performance with them and less storage in both the camera and on the computer, a little bit faster editing. I'm already seeing a slowdown in my editing process, just overall performance in Lightroom with these 24 megapixel images. I can't imagine the 40 and 50 and 60 megapixel photos. It would just bog everything down. So that's my take on that. So next up, I got a lot more in this video if you're interested. I already gave you my overall thoughts and conclusion right in the beginning, so you don't have to watch all the rest of this if you don't want. But if you want to find out more about how I came to these conclusions and also see a little bit of shooting in the field, I'm going to show you some stuff through the viewfinder as I'm shooting so you can actually see the performance of the camera. And I'll show you some final photos and just some of the things about how it was tracking autofocus and stuff like that. So if you're interested in that, keep watching. Let's go back to 3 weeks ago when I first got the camera, because I want to take you through my entire process of getting used to this camera. So getting it from day one, seeing what it was like, some of the thoughts I had, and how that changed over this 3 week period of time. So you've seen my final conclusions now after 3 weeks with it. Let's see what it was like on day one. Well, the last time I was sitting in front of this wall talking to you guys about a camera, it was the Nikon Z6 that I rented. Today, I just got the Z6II. So if you didn't watch my previous video, you may not know that I wasn't a big fan of the Z6. If you did watch that video, you know I wasn't a big fan of the Z6, but the biggest complaints were the fact that the autofocus and just kind of overall operation of the camera felt a little slow and a little laggy at times, and especially when I was shooting action. That's when I really felt the downfall of the camera. Initially, when I first got the camera, didn't like it at all. After about a week of shooting it, I came to like it a little bit better, and it certainly grew on me. And I just became a lot more comfortable with it, which was a good thing. But in the end, anytime I shot action, it seemed like it couldn't keep up, and that was a big downfall. So I got this Z6II with the understanding that, according to Nikon, it's going to be a little bit faster. It's got 2 processors in it, so we're going to get a little bit better autofocus performance and just general snappier performance overall. And that was the main thing I was looking for. I also wanted this camera for other reasons. The silent shutter is ideal sounding to me for a few projects I want to work on. And the fact that it's mirrorless and has a video feed out for some other projects I want to work on. I'm doing a lot more wildlife video shooting as well as behind the scenes video. And so this camera is going to be a lot better. Even the original Z6 was so much better for video anything than my D4S that I'm used to shooting. So certainly still keeping my D4S. So I'm going to have that for really high-paced action or anything that this doesn't seem like it's a good fit for. But I got the Z6. I'm really excited to try it out and see after some time what my thoughts are on this camera. I did the exact same thing with this as I did with the Z6 though. I put this 70-200 2.8 on it with the FTZ adapter, and turned it on, just started pointing around in the house, and I couldn't believe it. It feels snappier. It feels noticeably faster. Again, I just got this an hour or two ago, so I don't know how much of that's in my head. It's really dark, overcast day outside right now, and so not a lot of light coming into my home. I didn't have any lights on. I was just kind of focusing on stuff, and it just felt better. It really did. So I'm really hoping it's not just in my head because I want it to be faster and that it is actually faster. Other than that, I will say the same thing compared to the D4S. It still just feels so tiny and small, but you know, it does feel solid, like I said in my original thoughts on the original Z6. So it feels solid. This is the exact same body from everything I understand as the Z6 to the Z6II, so I wasn't expecting anything different there. All right, day 2 with the Z6II. I didn't get to really shoot much at all yesterday. The weather was horrible. It was just rainy out, so I did kind of pop outside and stand under my door overhang and just kind of point the 500mm around, and again, I gotta say, this thing's feeling snappier. I'm really excited that everything feels quicker on this camera. Obviously, I have to get out and shoot some action with it, shoot some actual real birds, real wildlife, and see what the difference is. But in the little bit of playing around with it in my house here, even when playing outside, I use the object tracking, which on the original Z6, honestly, it felt completely useless to me. It could not stay on a subject. This camera I would lock it onto a clump of leaves in the middle of a bush, and it would stay on the clump I started with as I was tracking the object selection around. It was kind of mind-blowing. All right, so check this out. I'm just gonna go from some closer stuff to some further stuff to some closer stuff again, then just let it track. And yeah, I mean, everything is real snappy there. Grab that shot, go right over there. I actually hear some birds around, but I don't know if I'll see them. But in any case, yeah, I'm just gonna keep pointing at some different stuff. Grab that branch, then come to these leaves here in the foreground. I mean, look at that. It's really snappy. And in pretty poor light here too. Grab that shot. Let's go to some closer leaves right over here. You know, and then I'll jump all the way over here and just kind of go right to those ivy leaves. Then we'll go to the trees way in the back. Snap back up here. I mean, really fast stuff. And then the other really interesting thing that I found was when I switch into the object tracking here. So watch this. There, I'm gonna lock on that group of leaves and check that out. I mean, it's just sticking right with it. Grab a couple shots there. I mean, even grabbing trees like that, you know, just let you kind of frame it any way you'd like, and it kind of stays focused on there. I don't know how that'll work with like some leaves or something like that, you know. I mean, look at that. I can compose it any way I want, and it's staying right on that cluster of leaves, and they are moving. So pretty incredible, I gotta say. I'm kind of amazed at that at this point. I'm really hoping it stays that way with actual birds and wildlife, and I'm excited to give it a shot. So tomorrow I should be getting out and photographing a belted kingfisher, which is granted one of the easiest things to do, mainly because this bird is just portraits. It's sitting on a wide open perch with super clean backgrounds, and so I don't anticipate a lot of issues there, but it'll give me a good chance to kind of just play with it, see how things are working. And I'm really curious to try the animal IAF tracking to see if it can do anything with birds that'll be interesting. We'll see. So, and I'm probably going to bring my 1.4 teleconverter as well with the 500, just to throw that in the mix, you know, so I can have like 5 adapters here. No, I'm just kidding. It'll be the FTZ adapter and the 1.4, then the 500. I'm just kind of curious to see what happens with all of that. So not that I use that teleconverter very often, but in a situation like this with the bird just sitting in one spot, being pretty static and not moving much, it's certainly worth a try. So yeah, so far I gotta say I'm excited. I gotta also just add, I really don't know how much of this is in my head, right? How much I want it to be better, because those were the big complaints I had with the original Z6 that I rented and shot for a while. Was it was a great camera. There's definitely some really cool features. I do like some of the mirrorless tech that gives me some advanced options, but the promise of being able to compose your shot and keep the focus point on the subject's head and or eye, and the promise of any kind of action, all fell apart with that original Z6. And if this can improve upon those, I'm going to be really happy with it. So I, again, still don't really expect it to outshine my D4S as far as performance and autofocus, but we'll see. I'm going to certainly put it through its paces and take you guys along with me on that journey. So we'll see how it goes, and I'm excited. All right, so I've been out with the Z6II a few more days now. I've had it for, I don't know, I've lost track of how many days, maybe 5-6 days, something like that. But I've had a chance to take it out and photograph a few different things. The first thing I did was real simple. It was a belted kingfisher out of a hide, so just sitting on a perch wide open, and you know, it performed just fine, but that's about as easy as it gets photographically, especially while the bird was sitting there. I did get to play with the subject tracking a little bit, so that was kind of cool to see it stay locked on the kingfisher, and then I could frame it any way I want. The animal detection did nothing on that bird. It didn't even recognize it as a bird, let alone eye focus. But that was about it for my first experience, kind of what I expected and what I was used to the last time when I shot that regular Z6. The next outing I did was a little bit more challenging. I went to my local pond right here and tried to photograph hooded mergansers. Unfortunately, there was only 2 of them and they didn't stay, so I only had 1 pass of them. But later on in that outing, I did have a female wood duck come in, and there was tons of Canada geese on the pond, so I did get to play around with a little bit more stuff with it. All right, time to take a look at what this camera can do in the field. So check it out, single point autofocus. Thanks, Canada Goose, just getting right in the way of the hooded merganser. But look at that, I picked up autofocus even when it was kind of overlapped with the goose, which was really nice. So yeah, just a simple track here, nice and easy, slow swimming, nice sharp photo, nothing amazing. But yeah, it's snappy. You can see even when it was out of focus, it jumps right back in. Seems really quick and just holds focus very nicely with the single point autofocus. So easy enough to lock focus and then recompose. And yeah, just I'm gonna track the birds away a little bit just to kind of show you how it does. All right, single point again with the wood duck here, this wood duck hen. Beautiful light this morning. Notice here I'm tracking the breast of the bird, and that was to keep the reflection in the frame, so I didn't have to move my autofocus point around, but stayed nice and sharp and got a great shot on that one. So again, I'm just going to keep on single point autofocus, got some distractions in the way, and just kind of track the bird as it swims around here. Single point autofocus just works great. I'm in continuous autofocus, so I'm just keeping my shutter button half pressed to just kind of track this female duck as she swims around, and just firing off a bunch of frames. Again, this is very new for me having the camera, so just kind of really curious, love the dramatic light on this one, about how it's going to work and actually give me good sharp photos or not. So I was shooting a little bit more than I probably would normally. Here's a great example of just moving the autofocus point around and then locking the composition and just recomposing and shooting. She's swimming right at me. It's tracking her, no problem, coming right in. She's going slow. So, and in this circumstance, she's going to come in really close. And you can see the meter showing me how dark I am. I'm like 2 stops under. So, as well as the viewfinder showing that, which is nice because now I can lighten it up and get that shot right there. So that is nice having the viewfinder kind of show you what it looks like. But
for me, this exposure you see right there, like that, is actually ideal, but it looks dark in the camera. This is a great example of where I'm trusting my meter more than I am the display in the viewfinder, and you can see it's only showing a third under, and actually the highlight points around the edge of the bird, like on the head and the right side of the breast of the bird, are exposed pretty much where I like them for the way I wanted to shoot this. And so if I were trusting just the viewfinder and the way it looked, I probably would have lightened the exposure and then would have ended up with something a little bit too light for my own personal tastes. So this is an example of where I'm still, and probably for a while, will be trusting my meter more than I am just the exposure and how it looks in that viewfinder. Here is a further example of that same issue. I'm going to actually darken this a little bit more and make it really dark, but look at all the detail that comes back in the final photo. Alright, now I'm going to switch to the animal detection, the animal subject detection, and potential eye AF. And you can see here, so this is the camera just using all its regular focus points, and there it thought it caught an object to track with that yellow box, but it was like the breast of the bird. And look at this, like the points are just jumping around. Sometimes you get the head, sometimes you get the side of the bird, the body. And so this is that inconsistency that I'm talking about with this subject tracking kind of thing, or the animal detection, I should say, in this circumstance, because I'm not using the subject tracking right here. But it's just, I can get some sharp shots, and these are great. I'm happy with them, but it just feels so inconsistent. So when it's jumping around like that all the time, I more often than not end up switching back to the single point or the dynamic so I can control what I'm focusing on, because like the camera's doing great right here, but there, it just hit the neck. And then let's watch as the bird kind of moves around. And then also just notice it's not catching the eye at all. It's not even trying to detect that. This is a backlit image, so I don't know if that makes much of a difference, but in my experience so far, it does not, in the fact that I've photographed some birds completely frontlit and close, and it could not pick up their eye. So there again, it just grabbed the neck, and then we'll see as it swims away here. This is an example of where when she turns away, it's going to start grabbing the tail. Look at these focus points are just jumping all over the place there. Some tail, some body, back to the head, which is good. So it's not that it completely fails, but the inconsistency makes it something I do not want to use in the field, because if I miss focus on that shot, I want it to be my fault, not just the camera randomly deciding to track a certain part of the bird, the back, the tail, who knows what. Or in other circumstances I've had, which I don't have a recording of, it just switches to another object entirely. So that's been my experience with this animal detection so far on the Z6II. Not something that I'm probably going to continue to use. This morning I was actually out and photographing bufflehead ducks. So I was out on a wide open bay, background's super far away. I was laying pretty much water level. There wasn't a lot of chop in the water, just real small waves, light winds. Light was perfect, real clear day. I had perfect sun coming out. Everything was front lit on in this circumstance, so that was nice. And in that circumstance, the camera worked amazingly well with the standard single point autofocus and the dynamic group in this. And I don't even know if it tells you how many points it is. I don't think it does, but it's the dynamic group focus, and it worked pretty much exactly as I expected and what I'm used to with my D4S. So that was really exciting. I actually even tracked a bufflehead duck. I had a nice male come flying in straight at the decoys I had set up, so that was great. And so I got to actually track it, and I'll show you how that looked with tracking and the resulting photo, and it's actually sharper than one I got with my D4S last year, and I had the 1.4 teleconverter in, so I was shooting 700 millimeter, and I gotta say, I normally don't like that teleconverter on the 500, this 500G lens. I kind of hate the teleconverter with it, but it actually did great, even with the bird flying at me pretty quick action. So that was exciting to see. All right, so here we are out in the field. You can see how it's wide open, very distant backgrounds, and this is what it looks like through the lens. This is that takeoff. So watch this, taking off. I even lost focus, but then got it back again. Check out that shot. I'm so amazed at that. And then caught a few more as it was landing like that. Worked out great. So Nice and sharp, great action shot. It looked really good. Here's a zoom in to see even more detail. You can see how sharp that photo is. It worked out really nice with that fast action when the bird was flying right at me. Keep in mind that was with the 500mm f4 and the 1.4 teleconverter. All of these shots are. So here, just going to show a little bit more tracking, and I'm going to switch to the subject tracking. You can see when it tries to do it on its own, it did no good. So I'm going to switch to the subject tracking mode where I lock on the subject, and it worked there. The one thing I don't like is how large the box is. So you can see it's like the entirety of the bird. At this distance, that's not that big a deal, but as subjects get a little bit closer, it's going to become more and more of an issue where it's just kind of encompassing the whole body and not just the head. You can see that guy is certainly hanging out and checking out the decoys there, but the nice thing is when it does lock on the subject there, and as long as I keep my autofocus point, or shutter button I should say, held halfway down, it keeps tracking it and I can kind of compose it. There it lost it a little bit. It picked up the wave, so it does do that sometimes. This is before sunrise, so it's still just kind of soft, not real bright out yet, but you know, just kind of getting a feel for how this tracks the bird in this scene and seeing if I can do a little bit of recomposition with it as well. And yeah, I just keep picking it back up because I'm just really not comfortable with how this system works yet. But there you can see I'm starting to offset it, and it's doing well to stay with the bird there. But again, that large point, I could see it in my eye. Sometimes it felt like it was just catching water instead of just the bird. I'll try something really far away and you can see it just has no hope of picking them up. Now we'll jump to the good light. Here I'm already tracking this bufflehead. And again, see how it works? But there it picked up the waves in front, the water in front. And then when it missed, like, it would not get back to the bird. I had to try like 4 times and keep pressing the autofocus button to get it to jump back. I'm now going to switch again to a little bit further bird. Again, it caught the water, but there it seems like it has the bird now. And it does a great job. There you can see it's tracking it around there. It allowed me to recompose the image and stay and focus on the bird. But is it on the bird? Is it on the water? Is it on the water behind it? I mean, that box is so big, it's really hard to determine exactly what you're focusing on when the subject is small in the frame like that. So far, I would say my take on it is, if I use it the same way I use my D4S, it's actually great. It's pretty much on par with what I'm used to, which is great because I don't think I ever got to that point with the original Z6. It still always felt like it was holding me back and limited compared to the D4S. I still don't like the viewfinder kind of waking up thing. I'm still getting used to that. So I think that's just going to be a new habit I gotta kind of ingrain in myself, in that I gotta tap the shutter button before I even start thinking about getting my eye down there. Because there's so many times where I just instinctively put my eye up to the viewfinder, you know, it's like, oh, I'm ready to shoot, and then, oh wait, it's not even trying to wake up because the camera fell asleep, so I gotta tap the shutter button. And I know I can actually change those settings and let things stay awake a little bit longer, which I'll start playing with as well as I get more experience. The battery life on it so far seems great, actually. I don't think I'm probably ever gonna buy a battery grip for it. Well, I shouldn't say that. I might miss the vertical shutter grip nature, so I might add that on at some point. But for now, as far as battery life, I've been really happy with it. I haven't really put it through a huge shoot or anything like that, just morning shoots for a couple hours. But I'm doing video. I have my external recorder hooked up to it, so I'm video out on the HDMI while I'm shooting stills even. So there's, you know, I'm putting a lot of strain, I would think, on the camera. And I think this morning I was out for shooting for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that. And it only went down to like 67%, I think, when I checked. So that was really good also. So a lot of good things. It just seems overall more responsive. The focus seems a little bit more sure in the regular modes. That subject tracking thing, I'm gonna keep playing with it, and maybe I just have to figure out what areas it's gonna work with and what it won't work with, kind of thing. And so that way maybe I can just take advantage of it when there are certain situations where it makes sense to use. But for the most part, I'm happy in that it still works just about as good as the D4S, or I would say actually as good as the D4S in the scenarios I've put it in so far.
I haven't shot any real heavy backlight, sun in the lens kind of stuff. You know, the backlight I was shooting the other day with the hooded mergansers and the Canada geese was real soft, so no light hitting the lens directly kind of thing. So that's, I know, traditionally when my other focus system would get challenged a little bit more. So I still have a lot of paces to put it through, and I just wanted to kind of give an update along the process here of where I'm at now. Still getting used to the button layout again. That's still throwing me off, just where even something as simple as, you know, the exposure compensation button and the ISO button are in a different spot than I'm used to on my other camera, so my muscle memory is just hitting the wrong buttons. And it throws you off when I'm shooting, you know. It actually, it takes my mind from, oh, how am I going to shoot this? How am I going to compose this? How do I want to track this? To, I got to fiddle with this setting and actually take my eye out and look to change things. And, you know, it's just, again, a reminder that knowing your gear inside and out so you don't have to mess with those settings is such a huge advantage with wildlife photography. And so, anyway, I don't expect it to take that long for me to get back to that point. And then, the one last thing I want to mention too is the video is incredible. I am in love with the video. I'm shooting more video than ever, which is great because it's fun, but it sucks because I have to edit that video. But for YouTube and the sharing that I want to do there, it's actually great. And I absolutely love how it can record my viewfinder while I'm shooting stills, so I can show exactly what I'm doing and how I'm shooting and tracking and all that sort of stuff. So that's really exciting. I think I'm really going to take advantage of that down the road and have a lot of fun videos to share for you guys with that. So that's where I'm at right now. Like I said, it's been day 5 or 6, but honestly only 3 legit outings shooting with this camera. I'm going back out tomorrow morning for belted kingfisher again. So again, should be easy, but maybe I'll try a little bit more action if the bird's flying around and that sort of thing.
Well, if you made it this far, you are a more patient person than I am. So thanks so much for watching the video and my thoughts on the Nikon Z6II. I thought I would end this just showing you some photos I've taken over the past few weeks with the camera. I hope you got a lot of helpful information about using this camera for wildlife and bird photography, and maybe it can help inform your decision. But as I mentioned, hopefully you don't use this as the only information to inform your decision. So happy shooting out there. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next video.